A malignant narcissist who thrives on lies, manipulation, and duper's delight believes he's untouchable. At work, he engineers downfalls with a smile, twisting truth until his victims are shunned or destroyed. But when Maya, a strong, unyielding woman who once rejected his advances, refuses to break, his mask slips. What begins as office sabotage spirals into obsession, leading to a violent confrontation where Maya barely escapes with her life. With her courage and evidence exposing his past cruelties, his empire of deceit finally collapses. What the glass tongue? He lived on the edge of other people's belief. Every conversation was a wire he could pluck, every glance an instrument tuned to his hand. Today the city glittered like a tray of coins outside his office window, and the hum of the building felt like applause. He had done it again, engineered a collapse so lovely in its precision that even the rubble looked like decor. People pointed and nodded and moved on, satisfied that the correct villain had been found. He smiled in the small, private way that told him he'd won. Maya had been the unexpected thrill. Not because she was spectacular, she wasn't, but because she would not bend. That made her rare and, therefore, delicious. He'd set the usual traps. A misfiled report forwarded with one sentence removed, a casually raised eyebrow in the right meeting, a perfectly timed joke that made others doubt her competence. The world did the rest. Colleagues whispered, managers tutted. She fought back with work, with proof, with calm. The tenacity irritated him. He liked the hunt when the prey ran. He liked it more when the prey fought with dignity. Either way, he won. He expected her to fold after the inventory scandal he'd created. She didn't. She came to HR with a file of clean emails and time-stamped logs that shredded his threadbare case. That humiliation tasted bitter in his mouth. A man like him thrived on knuckling knees, not on seeing them stand tall. So he stepped up the choreography. A refusal had started it. In the break room 2 weeks prior, he'd offered her coffee. It was an innocuous cruelty, a test. "Lunch tomorrow?" he asked, voice easy. Everyone around them had their scripts, men who pressed until a woman fled, women who smiled and deflected. Maya answered simply, "No thanks, I've already got plans." Her tone was flat, not rude, not flirty. She set a boundary, and that small human act looked to him like open defiance. He felt the color in his face shift. He cataloged it the way others catalog flowers, noting the shape, the petal, the thorns. The refusal lodged in him like a splinter. That night, he replayed it, slow and serpentine. He imagined her saying yes, imagined the easy pliancy he so rarely found and had bought with countless manipulations. She had refused, and that refusal ignited something coarse and animal behind his teeth. He loved to be obeyed. To be denied was a bruise, and he loved the sensation of bruises he could make on others. He began to push differently. He smiled at her in the hallway with a warmth meant to disarm, then sent an email from a burner account, gently undercutting her project. He told a story aloud near the boss's office about someone not pulling their weight, throwing out just enough detail that the mind of the listener filled in the rest. Little by little, he painted her as inconsistent where she was steady, as slippery where she was direct. Co-workers who'd once admired her competence began to squint, to hedge. The net closed. On the night it went very wrong for him, the rain came down in sheets and the parking garage smelled of wet concrete and oil. He liked the garage, echoing, anonymous, a place where scenes could be staged with neatness. He'd watched her leave that evening from the security camera feed that he'd learned to access through casual, well-placed questions. She moved with the kind of steady purpose that had irritated him. She checked the car door twice, tucked a strap over her shoulder, and started down the ramp toward the exit. He followed. There is a choreography to stalking when you've done it a long time, the right tempo, the distance that feels like coincidence. He eased into the shadow of a pillar and watched her figure recede. He imagined confronting her with a public breakdown, a slow pressure campaign of righteous rage that would finally make her wilt. But in the raw hush of the garage, seeing her small in the sodium light, the plan disintegrated into appetite. Her refusal, that tiny lunch refusal, had become a sharp stone in him. He wanted it back. The only way to get it back was to take it. He stepped from the shadow and called her name. Maya, he said like a man keeping a promise. She turned, eyes steady, not startled and not simpering. We need to talk. She kept the distance a sensible person keeps when offered trouble in a dark place. Not here, she said. That, again, a boundary. The sound scraped. He smiled close to perfectly. It's important. She shook her head. No, I don't want to do this in the garage. If you have an issue, tell HR. Something old and raw inside him, something that did not care for rules, snapped. The animal did not reason. He surged. In an instant, his hand closed on her arm with a strength that was meant to frighten, and his voice boiled into a rasp. You think you can throw me away? He hissed. She dug her elbow into the soft of his ribs, an instinctive move, then twisted. He felt the world lurch as she broke his grip. For a second, stunned outrage flared across his face, not at being hurt, but at being denied the spectacle of her capitulation. He lunged forward because, if nothing else, he could force the role. The man wronged, the man protecting himself from treachery. His fingers caught her coat. She swung. He felt the sting as her fist connected with his cheek, a bright pain that flashed like light through his skull. People always remembered violence in flashes, the sound, the bright smell of blood or copper, the way time slows greasy syrup. But this wasn't cinematic. It was slapdash and awful. Her knee drove upward into his stomach. He grunted, tasted metal, and for a second the pleasure dissolved into panic. She was quick. She had trained once, years ago, on some insistence of her own, a hobby he had once mocked when they'd been young. And now that training rose like a memory and made her limbs precise. She twisted, dropped weight, and used his reach against him, slamming her shoulder into his chest and breaking free. He staggered back, heart drumming, face slick with something warm and hot. A security light buzzed overhead. The echo of her shoes on concrete pounded the space between them. "Help!" she screamed, not for him, but because her lungs burned with a voice that wouldn't be silent. It was the right thing to do, the brave and ugly thing. The scream sliced through the empty levels and into the time-locked husk of the garage. Heads turned. A lone guard rounded a corner, radio clutched like a lifeline. Maya ran then like someone with water up to her chin. Fast, dangerous, beautiful in the way desperate people are. He chased for a moment, body going where his fury pointed, but his movement was clumsy, too hot, and too fast. The guard intercepted, placing himself between. The instant was small and loud, the guard's shout, the thud of feet, the metallic ring of a radio. People were coming, cameras were now aligned where he had wanted secrecy. He tasted panic now, thin and bitter, but beneath that panic a different anger rose, sour and endless. He had lost control. The police arrived minutes later and the story snapped into jurisdiction. Maya told everything. She had a bruise on her arm and a smear of his blood on her jacket where he'd grazed her face and, crucially, a month of record-keeping she'd been too cautious to share until now. She had saved emails where he'd suggested solutions that would isolate her, screen grabs of anonymous tips he'd engineered, security footage from nights he'd shadowed exits to intimidate others. And then the thing that made investigators sit up a pattern of complaints from other neighborhoods. A neighbor who'd been shoved once in a dispute about a fence, an ex who'd been hospitalized after a private party he'd organized where play fighting had gone too far. People often laughed off bruises. They didn't always sign affidavits, but the records were there. And the third or fourth corroboration is the syringe that makes the wound real. The press loved the neat arc. On the outside, he had been everything he'd performed. Suave, competent, indispensable. That facade dropped in one splash. The company could not buffer away the scandal with PR statements. The police could not be placated by charm. He'd left a web of threads that, once tugged by someone brave enough to scream, unraveled him. They arrested him beneath the railing where he'd once practiced charming smiles, cuffing him while cameras blinked and the rain set its own drumbeat. He felt something then, not quite like regret, more like annoyance. Not that he would be caught. He'd long ago accepted risk as a material of his work, but the bluntness of it irritated him, the inefficiency, the sudden end to his theater. In the cell, the world was small and harsh. Concrete, a fluorescent hum like a bad joke, the echo of boots on the corridor. He sat on a thin mattress, palms flat on the blanket, tasting the loss of that warm fizz that used to live in his gut. The duper's delight, that internal applause when the world took your lie and ran with it, had been the best drug he'd known. Now, the drug was gone. But he was not empty. Inside his skull, the film still played, the faces that had worked for him, the emails he had sent in the dead of night, the precise way he had pushed one person after another into corners until they thought they had nowhere left to go. He replayed the scene in the garage with the same clinical affection he applied to every con. He cataloged what had gone wrong, the guard's timing, the camera angle he hadn't otherwise noticed, the small hairline error in the anonymous tip he'd used twice before without consequence. Rounded edges, fixable. Evidence sat against him like a neat accusation. Footage stamped with time. An email chain where he had redirected a complaint, the neighbor's affidavit. The police had found a list on his dead laptop with names and dates, not exactly incriminating in isolation, but in context, a ledger of intent. He could feel the cold metal of the handcuffs on his wrists in the dark, and this made him smile in a thin and private way. Even now, even surrounded by concrete and the groan of pipes, he was making notes. He had always made notes. There was a new factor he hadn't accounted for, though. People had stopped wanting to be complicit. When she screamed, Maya tapped a particular human nerve, the part that recognizes cruelty. Witnesses who once would have smiled politely and averted their eyes instead spoke. Old rumors found new listeners, evidence multiplied like truth does when someone refuses to be quiet. They put him in the cell and the door clanged. For a little while, everything was dull. He listened to the drip of a faucet and the distant coughs in the corridor. He thought of the high, recalled exactly the taste of it, and felt the old hunger like a living thing that needed to be fed. He mapped his next moves in the margins of his mind. Denials shaped like prayers, carefully worded statements that would seed doubt, a whisper campaign to make the new witnesses uncertain. He imagined a few people who would still answer his calls, who would smooth his path. He had resources, he had charm, he had an instinct for leverage. But there was another, quieter realization in the back of him. The thing he'd loved the taste of making people bend now had a new weight. The bruise on Maya's arm, the smear on her jacket, the grainy footage of his hand closing, those were not just trophies. They were proof. There were boundaries he had crossed that would not be rolled back with an apology or a polished statement. His old schema of control had met a body that fought back instead of folding. That surprise ricocheted in his chest like a new, cold thrill. He sat on the cot and smiled. Not the warm, exultant smile that had once come so easily, but something thinner, sharper, the smile of a man recalibrating a long game. He had been caged, yes, but men like him always find ways to read the bars for weak points. For now, he would play the role the system expected, contrite, small, careful. He would whisper, he would charm, he would wait. And when he could, he would begin again. The thought was not a promise so much as a fact, a natural law in him. He had been taught by his own success that the world was clay. Even bruised, even shamed, that lesson carved a hard truth into his bones. He would not be content with silence. He would chew through it, over and over, until there was nothing left to quiet him. Outside the cell, life moved on. Ambulance lights, the soft footsteps of witnesses leaving statements, the low murmur of forklifts at the warehouse where he had once pulled strings. Inside, he catalogued and planned. In the thin yellow light, he smiled again. It was the last smile, perhaps, or the first of a new act. Either way, it lingered. A narcissist is not simply selfish or arrogant. They are architects of deception, feeding on the power they gain from bending reality to their will. Their danger lies in how ordinary they appear, how seamlessly they slip into roles that earn trust and admiration. By the time their mask slips, the damage is often already done. Reputations ruined, lives fractured, sometimes even bodies broken. They thrive on the thrill of getting away with it, on the secret satisfaction of watching others fall for their illusions. And while society often overlooks their patterns, dismissing red flags as charm or confidence, the truth remains. They are predators who walk among us, hidden in plain sight until the moment they strike.